Have you ever had that moment when everything in your life seems absolutely perfect, only to watch it shatter into a million pieces? That's what happened to me last summer, when what should have been the most romantic trip of my life turned into something I never could have imagined. But before you judge my husband Tom, or his ex-girlfriend Rachel, or even me, let me tell you how a dream honeymoon in paradise became the turning point that would change everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and forgiveness. If you're wondering whether this story has a happy ending, I honestly don't know. What I do know is that sometimes the most important lessons come from the moments that break us. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let me tell you about the day my husband decided to invite his ex-girlfriend to join us on our honeymoon. The morning everything began was perfect. Almost too perfect, looking back now. Our Seattle apartment was bathed in rare summer sunlight, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that had made us fall in love with this place a year ago. Tom and I were in our usual morning chaos of packing last-minute items for our honeymoon. He was obsessing over his camera gear, making sure he had every lens and filter for capturing our Maldives paradise, while I quadruple-checked our passports and travel documents. 2 weeks in an overwater bungalow at the Palm Paradise Resort and Spa. It was more than I had ever dreamed of. We had spent months planning every detail, from the private sunset dinner on the beach to the couple's massage overlooking the crystal-clear lagoon. The cost had made me wince, but as Tom said, you only get one honeymoon. Or at least, that's what I thought at the time. I was folding my new bikinis, carefully chosen for those Instagram-worthy beach photos, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophie, my best friend and maid of honor, sending another congratulatory text with about 50 heart emojis. Have the most amazing time, Mrs. Wilson. Still can't believe my best friend is married. I smiled, my hand automatically going to the delicate gold band on my finger. Mrs. Wilson. It still felt surreal. Tom came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "Ready for paradise, Mrs. Wilson?" he asked, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I turned in his arms, taking in his familiar features. The warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The small scar above his eyebrow from a childhood skateboarding accident. The stubble he'd been too excited to shave this morning. "More than ready, Mr. Wilson," I replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. This was happiness, I thought. This was what forever felt like. The Uber to SeaTac International Airport was right on time, our driver helping us load our ridiculous amount of luggage into the trunk. As we pulled away from our apartment building, I watched the Seattle skyline in the rearview mirror, the Space Needle standing proud against the unusually clear blue sky. Everything felt symbolic that morning, like the universe was giving us its blessing. We were early for our flight, so we stopped at our favorite airport coffee shop. Tom insisted on getting our usual orders one last time before 2 weeks of tropical drinks, my oat milk latte and his Americano with an extra shot. As we sat at the tiny table, his hand found mine across the surface, our rings clinking together softly. "I have a surprise for you," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. My heart skipped. Tom was always thoughtful with his surprises, whether it was concert tickets to my favorite band or a surprise weekend getaway to Vancouver. But you have to wait until we get there. "Give me a hint?" I pleaded, but he just shook his head, grinning. If I had known then what the surprise would be, I might have gotten right back in that Uber and gone home. But isn't that always the way? Hindsight is brutal in its clarity. The flight to Male International Airport was long, but we were too excited to care. We watched movies, shared overpriced airplane snacks, and dozed off holding hands across the armrest. Tom kept taking pictures of everything. The clouds outside our window, me sleeping against his shoulder, our intertwined hands with our new rings. "Documenting every moment," he said when I teased him about it. "I want to remember everything about these 2 weeks." We arrived in Male as the sun was setting, the sky painted in strokes of pink and orange that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. A resort representative met us at the airport, a cheerful local man named Arif, who guided us to the seaplane that would take us to our final destination. As we soared over the atolls, the water below us was every shade of blue imaginable, dotted with tiny islands that looked like green jewels scattered across the ocean. Our overwater bungalow was everything we had dreamed of and more. The glass floor panels showed tropical fish swimming beneath our feet, and the private deck had steps leading directly into the lagoon. I stood on the deck, watching the sunset paint the water in golden light, feeling Tom's arms wrap around me from behind. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to my neck. "Perfect," I replied, and I meant it. Everything was perfect. That first evening, we had dinner at the resort's main restaurant, our table set right on the beach. The sand was still warm from the day's sun under my bare feet, and tiki torches cast a romantic glow over everything. Tom ordered an expensive bottle of champagne, and we toasted to our future, to forever, to us. It wasn't until we were walking back to our bungalow, slightly tipsy from the champagne and drunk on happiness, that Tom's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something flickered across his face. So quick I almost missed it. Almost. Everything. "Okay?" I asked, swinging our joined hands between us. "Yeah, just some work stuff," he said, sliding the phone back into his pocket. "Nothing important." I should have known then. There's always a moment, isn't there? A tiny crack in the perfect facade. A split second when you could have changed everything if only you'd paid more attention. But I was too happy, too in love, too trusting to see it. That night, as I fell asleep to the sound of gentle waves lapping against the stilts of our bungalow, I had no idea that our perfect honeymoon was about to take a turn I never could have anticipated. I didn't know that in less than 24 hours, I would be facing a choice that would test everything I thought I knew about love, marriage, and trust. But that's getting ahead of the story. First, I need to tell you about Rachel Martinez, and why my husband thought it was a good idea to invite his ex-girlfriend to join us in paradise. If you want to hear what happens next, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, this story is about to take some turns that even I couldn't have predicted. Drop a comment below letting me know what you think Tom's surprise might be. I'd love to hear your theories. And don't forget to like this video if you want to hear the rest of this wild honeymoon story. See you in the next video, where things start to get really interesting. Our second day in paradise started with a sunrise yoga session on the beach. I had dragged Tom along, promising him the photos would be worth it. As we stretched on our mats, watching the sky transform from deep purple to brilliant orange, I noticed him checking his phone again. The screen's blue glow looked out of place among the natural beauty surrounding us. The yoga instructor, a serene woman named Maya, kept shooting him disapproving glances, but Tom seemed oblivious, his thumbs typing rapidly. Back at our bungalow, while I was showering off the sand and salt, I heard Tom's voice drifting through the bathroom door. He was speaking in that low, hushed tone people use when they're trying not to be overheard. I turned off the water, but by the time I wrapped myself in a towel, he had finished his call. "Who was that?" I asked casually, running a comb through my wet hair. "Just checking on some work stuff," Tom replied, but he wouldn't quite meet my eyes in the mirror. My stomach did a tiny flip, the kind of sensation you get when something feels off, but you can't quite put your finger on why. Tom suggested we have breakfast on our private deck, and soon the strange phone call was forgotten as we feasted on fresh tropical fruits and coffee. The water below us was crystal clear, and we could see colorful fish darting between the coral. It felt like being in our own private aquarium. "So, about that surprise I mentioned," Tom began, setting down his coffee cup. His hands were fidgeting with his napkin, a nervous habit I'd noticed during our wedding vows. "I've been thinking about how to tell you this." Before he could continue, his phone buzzed again. This time, I caught a glimpse of the screen before he could snatch it away. The name Rachel M. flashed across the top, along with what looked like a flight confirmation. Rachel Martinez. I hadn't heard that name in over 2 years, but it still had the power to make my chest tighten. Rachel, Tom's ex-girlfriend from his days at the University of Washington. Rachel, the accomplished marine biologist who had left him to pursue her research in Australia. Rachel, who had written him a lengthy email the week before our wedding, which Tom had shown me in the spirit of complete honesty. "Tom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "why is Rachel sending you flight confirmations?" He ran his hand through his hair, another nervous tell. "That's actually part of the surprise," he said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Remember how we talked about wanting to learn more about marine life and coral reefs?"
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
My mind flashed back to our wedding planning when we were choosing honeymoon destinations. We had picked the Maldives partly because of my fascination with marine ecosystems, something that had initially drawn Tom and Rachel together during their college years. "Rachel's doing research here," Tom continued, words tumbling out faster now. "She's studying the impact of climate change on coral reefs. And when she heard we were coming, Emma, she's offered to give us private tours of the reefs, show us things most tourists never get to see. She's arriving tomorrow." The perfectly ripe papaya I'd been eating suddenly tasted like cardboard. "You invited your ex-girlfriend to join us on our honeymoon?" "Not to join us exactly," he backpedaled. "Just to show us around for a few days. She's staying in the staff quarters on the other side of the island. Emma, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Rachel has access to restricted areas, research, sites. She can show us things that normal tourists never get to see." I set down my fork, trying to process what I was hearing. "When did you plan this?" "We've been emailing since before the wedding," he admitted. "I wanted it to be a surprise. I know how much you love marine life, and Rachel is one of the leading experts in coral reef conservation. I thought you'd be excited." The worst part was, I could see his logic. In some parallel universe, maybe I would have been excited, but this was our honeymoon, and he had invited his ex-girlfriend, the same woman who had broken his heart 3 years ago, to be part of it. "Did it occur to you that maybe I wanted this time to be just us?" My voice was quiet, but I could hear the hurt in it. "That maybe our honeymoon wasn't the best time to reconnect with your ex?" Tom reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled back. "Emma, it's not about reconnecting. Rachel is married now. You know that, right? She married her research partner last year. This is purely professional." That was news to me. I pushed back my chair, needing space, needing air, despite being surrounded by endless ocean. "I need to think," I said, standing up. "I'm going for a walk." "Emma, please." Tom started to rise, but I held up my hand. "Don't. Just don't follow me. I need time to process this." I walked along the wooden pathway connecting the overwater bungalows, my mind spinning. Other honeymooning couples smiled as they passed, wrapped up in their own perfect bubbles of happiness. A young woman about my age was taking photos of her new ring against the spectacular ocean backdrop. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 10 minutes ago, and yet everything had changed. I found myself at the island's main beach, my feet carrying me automatically to the water's edge. The sand was already warm despite the early hour, and small waves lapped at my toes. I sat down, not caring about getting my sundress wet, and tried to sort through my feelings. Was I overreacting? Tom's explanation made sense on paper. Rachel was married, she was here for work, and she could offer us an incredible experience. But something about the situation felt wrong. Maybe it was the secrecy, the hushed phone calls, the way he had planned this behind my back while we were planning our wedding. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Sophie. "How's paradise?" accompanied by a string of beach emojis. I started typing, deleted it, started again. How could I explain this situation without sounding paranoid or insecure? Instead, I opened Instagram and looked up Rachel Martinez. Her profile was public, filled with stunning underwater photography and research updates. And there it was, about 30 posts down, her wedding photo. She looked beautiful in a simple white dress, standing next to a tall man with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair. Dr. James Cooper, according to the caption. They were both wearing wetsuits under their wedding clothes, having apparently said their vows while diving on the Great Barrier Reef. I scrolled further, losing myself in images of coral reefs, marine life, and scientific conferences. Rachel's life looked exactly like what she had always wanted, the life she had left Tom to pursue. She had chosen her career over him, and it had paid off spectacularly. There were awards, research grants, speaking engagements at prestigious universities. A shadow fell across my phone screen, and I looked up to find Tom standing there, 2 coconuts with straws in his hands. "Peace offering?" he said tentatively, holding one out to me. I took it, more for something to do with my hands than because I wanted it. "Did you know she got married on a reef?" Tom sat down beside me, leaving a careful few inches of space between us. "I saw the photos when she posted them. Emma, I should have told you about this plan. I got so excited about the opportunity that I didn't think about how it might make you feel." "That's the problem, Tom. You didn't think." I turned to look at him, really look at him. His face was pinched with worry, and I could see he genuinely hadn't expected this reaction. "How would you feel if I had secretly arranged for my ex to join us on our honeymoon?" He winced. "When you put it that way, I messed up, didn't I?" "Yeah, you did." I took a sip of coconut water, the sweet liquid doing little to wash away the bitter taste in my mouth. "I don't doubt that Rachel could show us amazing things, but this is our honeymoon, Tom. Our time to start our marriage, just us. And now it feels like there's this ghost from your past intruding on our present." A hermit crab scuttled past our feet, carrying its borrowed home on its back. I watched it make its way across the sand, envying its ability to retreat into its shell when things got uncomfortable. "I can cancel," Tom offered. "I'll email her right now and explain that it's not a good time." Part of me wanted to say yes, to go back to our perfect honeymoon bubble and pretend this had never happened. But another part, the part that had always hated confrontation, the part that didn't want to seem like the jealous, insecure wife, held me back. "No," I heard myself say. "Don't cancel, but I have conditions." Tom's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Anything. First, no more secrets. I want to see all the communication you've had with her about this plan. Second, we set clear boundaries. This is a professional interaction only. No reminiscing about old times, no private conversations. And third," I took a deep breath. "If at any point I feel uncomfortable, she leaves. No questions asked." Tom nodded solemnly. "Those are more than fair. I'm sorry, Emma. I really thought this would be an amazing addition to our trip, but I should have discussed it with you first." I leaned my head on his shoulder, some of the tension leaving my body. "I know your heart was in the right place. Just no more surprises like this, okay?" "Promise," he said, kissing the top of my head. We sat there for a while, watching the waves and sharing our coconut water. On the surface, everything was resolved. Tom had apologized, I had set boundaries, and we had a plan moving forward. But as I watched a seabird dive into the crystal clear water, emerging with a fish in its beak, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Back in our bungalow, Tom showed me the email exchanges with Rachel. They were exactly what he had described. professional, focused on the research opportunities and unique experiences she could offer us. There were no hidden meanings, no flirtatious undertones, nothing to justify my unease. She even mentioned her husband several times, talking about the research they were doing together. So why did I still feel like something was off? I spent the rest of the day trying to push aside my concerns and enjoy paradise. We went snorkeling near our bungalow, the warm water teeming with tropical fish. Tom took underwater photos with his new camera, and for a few hours, it felt like nothing had changed. But every time his phone buzzed with another message from Rachel finalizing tomorrow's plans, my stomach would clench. That evening, as we dressed for dinner, I found myself paying extra attention to my appearance. I chose my favorite new sundress, the white one with tiny blue flowers that made my eyes look more green than hazel. I spent more time than usual on my hair and makeup, trying to tame my waves into something that could withstand the tropical humidity. "You look beautiful," Tom said, coming up behind me as I applied mascara. "But you always do." I met his eyes. In the mirror. What does Rachel look like now? Has she changed much since college? As soon as the words left my mouth, I wished I could take them back. Tom's face fell slightly. "Emma." "Never mind," I said quickly, recapping the mascara. I don't know why I asked that. It doesn't matter. But it did matter, and we both knew it. Tomorrow, I would be meeting the woman who had once held my husband's heart. The woman who had chosen her dreams over him, who had achieved everything she set out to do. The woman who was now, somehow, about to become part of our honeymoon story. As we walked to dinner along the torch-lit pathway, I thought about all the different ways tomorrow could go. Maybe Rachel would be professional and distant, making the whole situation easier. Maybe we would actually have an amazing experience, learning about the reefs and marine life. Or maybe. I pushed that thought away before it could fully form. Tom's hand found mine in the gathering darkness, his thumb rubbing over my wedding ring. The simple gesture reminded me of what was important. We were married now, committed to each other. Whatever happened tomorrow couldn't change that. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the waves beneath our bungalow and Tom's steady breathing beside me, I couldn't help but wonder, had I made the right choice in agreeing to this? And more importantly, what wasn't Tom telling me about? Why he really wanted Rachel here? The ceiling fan spun lazily above us, casting shifting shadows on the walls. In less than 12 hours, Rachel Martinez would arrive on our tiny island paradise, and nothing would be the same. I just didn't know yet whether that change would strengthen our new marriage or reveal cracks I wasn't ready to see. Morning arrived, with a knock on our door that startled me from my uneasy sleep. The resort staff delivered breakfast precisely at 7, just as arranged. I watched Tom sign for the delivery, his hair still mussed from sleep, trying to push down the anxiety that had been building since dawn. Today was the day. I picked at my mango and yogurt parfait, while Tom devoured his eggs Benedict with the kind of appetite that comes from being completely unbothered by what lay ahead. The message had come late last night. Rachel's seaplane would arrive at 9. In less than 2 hours, she would be here, on our tiny slice of paradise. "You're quiet this morning," Tom observed, reaching across the table to steal a piece of my untouched toast. I gave him a look that made him withdraw his hand. "Emma, it's going to be fine. You'll see." The thing about Tom is that he's always been almost unbearably optimistic. It's one of the things I fell in love with, his ability to see the best in every situation, every person. But right now, that optimism felt like sandpaper against my raw nerves. I excused myself to get ready, spending an unreasonable amount of time choosing what to wear. The red bikini was too obvious, the black one too severe. I finally settled on a turquoise one-piece with a tasteful cutout at the waist, covering it with a gauzy white beach dress. Professional but pretty, approachable but not trying too hard. My hand trembled slightly as I applied sunscreen, and I Caught myself reaching for the waterproof mascara. Was I really about to put on makeup for a day of snorkeling? But I uncapped it anyway, telling myself it was about feeling confident, not about competing with a ghost from Tom's past. The walk to the main dock felt endless. Every step on the wooden planks echoed with my heartbeat, the crystal clear water below offering no distraction from my thoughts. Other guests passed us with easy smiles, living in their own honeymoon bubbles. I envied their simplicity. The seaplane appeared on the horizon right on schedule, a tiny white speck growing larger against the cloudless blue sky. My hand found Tom's automatically, squeezing perhaps a bit too tight. He squeezed back, his palm warm and steady against mine. The plane's arrival scattered a group of seabirds, their wings flashing silver in the morning sun as they wheeled away. The water erupted in a spray of white as the pontoons touched down, and my heart lodged somewhere in my throat. This was really happening. I'm not sure what I expected Rachel to look like. In my imagination, she had taken on mythical proportions. Some combination of marine scientist and supermodel, probably with perfect hair that somehow defied the tropical humidity. The reality was both better and worse. She emerged from the seaplane with the easy grace of someone used to island hopping. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, her skin sun-kissed in a way that spoke of days spent on the water. She wore simple khaki shorts and a light blue research center polo shirt, looking every bit the scientist she was. No makeup, no pretense, just quiet confidence that made my carefully chosen outfit feel suddenly overdone. "Tom! Emma!" she waved, making her way down the dock toward us. Her smile was genuine, reaching all the way to her eyes. Eyes that I noticed were almost the same shade of brown as Tom's. "Thank you so much for letting me crash your honeymoon. Professionally speaking, of course." She hugged Tom briefly, the kind of quick embrace old friends share, then turned to me with that same warm smile. "Emma, it's so wonderful to finally meet you. Tom's told me so much about your interest in marine conservation." Her handshake was firm, her hands slightly calloused from rope and salt water. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her eyes. From squinting at the sun, the scattered freckles across her nose. She was beautiful, yes, but in a way that seemed unconscious, unforced. "Thank you for offering to show us around," I managed, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "It's a unique opportunity." Well, when Tom mentioned you were coming here, I couldn't resist. The reefs around this atoll are some of the most pristine in the Maldives. We're doing fascinating work on coral regeneration that I'd love to show you both. Her enthusiasm was infectious, her passion for her work evident, in every word. Despite myself, I found my tension easing slightly. This was what Tom had meant. Rachel wasn't here to reminisce about the past or interfere with our present. She was here as a scientist, eager to share her knowledge. We helped her unload her equipment, an impressive array of cameras, sampling tools, and monitoring devices. She chatted easily as we walked to the research center, explaining the various projects underway around the island. Tom asked questions about water temperature, monitoring systems, and I found myself drawn into a discussion about the impact of tourist activities on reef health. The research center was a simple building on stilts over the water, its walls covered in charts, maps, and underwater photographs. Rachel introduced us to her colleagues, a diverse group of scientists from around the world, all focused on their specialized areas of study. None of them seemed surprised or curious about her showing around a honeymooning couple. This was clearly just another day for them. "We'll start with a briefing about reef safety and conservation," Rachel explained, leading us to a small conference room. "Then we'll gear up for a shallow dive near the house reef. That area has some of our most successful coral restoration projects." As she pulled up a presentation on the projector, I watched Tom from the corner of my eye. He was completely engaged, leaning forward slightly in his chair, that familiar look of concentration on his face. But it wasn't the look of a man pining for his ex-girlfriend. It was the same expression he wore when learning about anything that interested him. The morning passed in a blur of information about coral species, water chemistry, and conservation techniques. Rachel was an excellent teacher, making complex scientific concepts accessible without oversimplifying them. By the time we broke for lunch, my notebook was filled with questions and observations. We ate at the research center's casual cafeteria, sharing a table with 2 other marine biologists who were studying sea turtle migration patterns. The conversation flowed easily, focused entirely on science and conservation. Not once did Rachel mention her history with Tom or make any reference to their shared past. After lunch, we suited up for our dive. Rachel helped me adjust my equipment, her movements efficient and professional. "You're going to love this," she said, checking my air gauge. "The restoration site is incredible. We've seen a 40% increase in fish population since we started the project." In the water, Rachel was in her element. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who spent more time under the waves than above them. She pointed out things I would have missed: a tiny cleaner shrimp servicing a larger fish, a well-camouflaged octopus changing colors to match the coral, the delicate new growth on the restoration structures. Tom followed with his camera, documenting everything. Through my mask, I could see his eyes shining with excitement every time Rachel signaled us to look at something new. But it wasn't just him. I found myself equally captivated by the underwater world she was showing us. We surfaced after what felt like minutes but had actually been over an hour. As we climbed back onto the research platform, Rachel pulling off her mask with practiced ease, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The dive had been incredible, unlike any other snorkeling or diving experience I'd ever had. Rachel's expertise had transformed what could have been a simple tourist activity into something educational and meaningful. But there was something else, something that had been nagging at me throughout the dive. It wasn't anything Rachel had done or said. In fact, she had been nothing but professional and friendly. It was something in the way she and Tom moved underwater, anticipating each other's movements, communicating with subtle gestures that spoke of years of shared experience. "That was amazing," Tom exclaimed as we peeled off our wetsuits. "The way those parrotfish were interacting with the new coral growth. I got some great shots." Rachel beamed, her face flushed from the dive. "Wait until you see what I have planned for tomorrow. There's a deeper site where we're studying the impact of climate change on coral spawning patterns." Tomorrow. Right. This wasn't just a one-day thing. Rachel would be part of our honeymoon for the next few days, showing us progressively more interesting and exclusive sites. The thought made my stomach twist, even as my mind was already curious about what we would see next. Back in our bungalow, preparing for dinner, I watched Tom download his photos from the dive. His excitement was palpable as he showed me shot after shot of coral formations, fish schools, and underwater landscapes. Many of them featured Rachel pointing out various features, her face obscured by the diving mask, but her body language animated and engaging. "Today was incredible," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I tried to tame my salt-tangled hair. "Aren't you glad we did this?" I met his eyes in the mirror, searching for any sign that this was more than just scientific enthusiasm. But all I saw was my husband, happy and excited about learning something new. "It was amazing," I admitted. "Rachel really knows her stuff." "See? I told you it would be fine." He kissed my cheek and headed for the shower, humming to himself. As I heard the water start running, I sat on the edge of our bed and picked up my phone. I had several messages from Sophie asking how things were going. I started typing, then stopped. How could I explain today? How could I tell her that my husband's ex-girlfriend had spent the day showing us incredible things, being perfectly lovely, and making me feel simultaneously grateful for the experience and unsettled by her presence? The sunset painted the ocean in shades of pink and gold, but I barely noticed its beauty. Tomorrow would bring another day of this strange dynamic. Me, my new husband, and the woman who had once been the center of his world, all pretending this was completely normal. I thought about Rachel's wedding photo, her simple dress, and genuine smile as she prepared to say her vows underwater. She had built exactly the life she wanted, pursuing her passion without compromise. Had she ever regretted leaving Tom behind to do it? And more importantly, did some small part of Tom wish he had followed her into that life of science and discovery? The questions swirled in my mind like the tide beneath our bungalow, pulling me deeper into thoughts I wasn't sure I wanted to explore. But as the light faded from the sky and Tom emerged from the shower, still humming that same tune, I realized something. This was just the beginning. Whatever was really going on here, whether it was exactly what it seemed or something more complicated, would reveal itself in time. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what those revelations might bring. Dinner that night was at the resort's signature underwater restaurant. The curved glass ceiling revealed the nighttime ocean above us, illuminated by subtle lighting that attracted schools of silvery fish. Under different circumstances, it would have been impossibly romantic. Instead, I found myself seated across from Rachel, watching marine life swirl above us while she explained the nocturnal feeding patterns of reef fish. "The bioluminescence here is extraordinary," Rachel said, pausing as our appetizers arrived. "If you're interested, we could do a night dive tomorrow. The reef comes alive after dark. It's like entering a different world entirely." Tom's face lit up at the suggestion. "That would be incredible. Emma, remember how you always said you wanted to see bioluminescent plankton?" I pushed my tuna tartare around the plate, trying to ignore the way Rachel's eyes lingered on Tom's enthusiastic expression. "I'm not certified for night diving," I said, the words coming out more clipped than I intended. "Oh, that's not a problem," Rachel assured me, taking a sip of her white wine. "We can do a shallow snorkel instead. The phenomenon is actually more visible from the surface anyway." Before I could respond, a tall man approached our table. His silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and he wore the same research center polo as Rachel. "There you are," he said, placing a hand on Rachel's shoulder. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Rachel's entire face transformed, softening into a genuine smile. "James, I thought you weren't arriving until tomorrow." She stood to embrace him, then turned to us. "Tom, Emma, this is my husband, Dr. James Cooper. James, these are the honeymooners I told you about." James shook our hands warmly, pulling up a chair to join us. "Rachel's been talking nonstop about showing you the restoration sites. I hope she hasn't bored you too much with all the scientific details." "Not at all," Tom replied. "It's been fascinating. We were just discussing the possibility of a night excursion tomorrow." I studied James as he settled into the conversation. He was older than Rachel by at least a decade, but they moved in sync, like dancers who knew each other's rhythms instinctively. When he spoke about their research, his eyes held the same passionate gleam as Rachel's. "The night dives here are spectacular," James agreed, ordering a glass of wine to match Rachel's. "Though I must admit, I'm a bit jealous Rachel got to show you the shallow reef first. That's usually my territory." Something in his tone made me look closer. Was there a hint of tension beneath his casual words? But Rachel just laughed, touching his arm affectionately. "You know I couldn't resist showing off our baby corals. Besides, you were stuck in that conference call with the foundation." The arrival of our main courses temporarily paused the conversation. I had ordered the local fish special, but found myself struggling to enjoy it. James and Tom had fallen into an animated discussion about underwater photography techniques, while Rachel added technical details about lighting conditions at different depths. Watching them interact, I felt like I was seeing multiple stories unfold simultaneously. There was the surface narrative, two couples sharing a pleasant dinner, discussing shared interests. But beneath that, I caught glimpses of something else. The way James's hand remained on Rachel's chair, slightly possessive. The quick glances Rachel shot Tom when she thought no one was looking. The enthusiasm in Tom's voice that seemed just a touch too forced. "Emma, Rachel mentioned you. Work in environmental law," James said suddenly, drawing me into the conversation. "We could really use your perspective on some of the regulatory challenges we're facing with the conservation zones." I straightened, grateful for the chance to contribute something meaningful. "Actually, my firm recently handled a case involving marine protected areas in the Pacific. The jurisdictional issues can be incredibly complex." For the next 20 minutes, James and I discussed the intersection of environmental law and marine conservation. He was genuinely interested in my insights, asking thoughtful questions and sharing relevant examples from his work. I found myself relaxing slightly, appreciating his effort to include me. "We should collaborate sometime," he suggested as our plates were cleared. "The research center is always looking for legal expertise, especially regarding international waters." Rachel's fork clinked against her plate. "That's a wonderful idea," she said, but something flickered across her face. Uncertainty? Concern? Before her professional smile returned, dessert arrived. A delicate passion fruit pavlova that looked too pretty to eat. As we shared the dessert, I noticed Rachel barely touched hers, instead watching Tom photograph the artistic presentation. Her expression was hard to read in the blue-tinted light from the aquarium above. "Remember that little dessert place in the university district?" she said suddenly, addressing Tom. "The one that made those amazing pavlovas?" Tom's camera lowered, slightly. "Sweet Delights? They closed down last year, actually." "Oh." Rachel pushed her dessert around the plate. "That's a shame. We used to go there all the time during finals week." James cleared his throat softly. "Speaking of finals, how's the term paper coming along, darling? Weren't you supposed to submit it to the journal this week?" The moment broke. Rachel launched into an explanation of her latest research paper, but I had seen it. The shadow that crossed Tom's face at the mention of their college days, the way his fingers tightened slightly around his camera. After dinner, James and Rachel excused themselves, citing early morning research commitments. We watched them walk away along the torchlit path, James's arm around Rachel's waist, her head tilted toward him as they talked. "They seem happy," I said carefully as Tom and I made our way back to our bungalow. "They are," Tom agreed quickly. "Too quickly?" "James is brilliant. They're doing amazing work together." The night air was heavy with the scent of tropical flowers and salt spray. Music drifted from the resort's beach bar, where other couples were enjoying their perfectly normal honeymoons. I wondered what they would think if they knew our situation. In our bungalow, I stepped onto the private deck while Tom showered. The moon cast a silver path across the water, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of a boat's engine. I thought about Rachel and James in their staff quarters, about the way they moved together with such practiced ease. Was that what real love looked like? Or was it just another perfect surface hiding deeper currents? My phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. "How's paradise? Miss you." Attached was a photo of her cat wearing a tiny party hat, apparently celebrating its birthday. The normalcy of it made my throat tight. I started typing, "You won't believe what's happening," then deleted it. How could I explain this situation without sounding crazy? My husband's ex-girlfriend and her husband are turning our honeymoon into a marine biology field trip, and I can't tell if I'm paranoid or picking up on real undercurrents of tension. Instead, I sent back a simple, "Paradise is interesting. Call you soon," followed by a heart emoji. Tom emerged from the shower, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Cold?" he asked, noticing my slight shiver. "Just thinking," I replied, leaning back against him. "James seems nice." Tom murmured, his chin resting on my shoulder. They're good together. He understands her in a way I never did. The words hung in the air between us. Was that regret in his voice? Or just reflection? Before I could analyze it further, he turned me around to face him. Thank you for being so understanding about all this, he said, his hands warm on my waist. I know it's not a conventional honeymoon activity, spending time with my ex and her husband. But the research they're doing here is incredible, and getting to see it firsthand. I get it, I interrupted, not sure I wanted to hear him praise their work again. It's a unique opportunity. He kissed me then, soft and sweet, tasting of passion fruit and possibility. For a moment, I let myself forget about Rachel and James, about coral reefs and college memories. This was my husband, my love, my future. But later, as Tom slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake listening to the waves. Tomorrow would bring another day of navigating these complex waters. Another day of watching Tom and Rachel share inside. Jokes about their college days, of seeing James's subtle reactions, of questioning every gesture and word. I thought about the night dive Rachel had suggested. The idea of entering the dark ocean, trusting her to guide us through an alien environment, made my stomach clench, but refusing would make me look petty, unsupportive of Tom's interests. My wedding ring caught the moonlight streaming through our window, sending tiny reflections dancing across the ceiling. Such a small circle of metal, meant to symbolize endless love and trust. I twisted it around my finger, remembering the moment Tom had placed it there less than 2 weeks ago. A sound carried across the water. Laughter from another bungalow, maybe, or just the wind playing tricks. I imagined Rachel and James in their quarters, preparing for tomorrow's research. Did they lie awake at night too, thinking about the past and its hold on the present? The ceiling fan spun lazily above us, its shadows making patterns that reminded me of waves. Tomorrow would bring new discoveries, new tensions, new moments of doubt and connection. I just had to keep my head above water, keep watching, keep trying to understand what was really happening beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect scientific collaboration. As I finally drifted toward sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind. In the ocean, the most dangerous currents are often the ones you can't see from above. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all being pulled by invisible forces, moving towards something none of us were prepared to face. The question was, when we finally saw what lay beneath these calm waters, would our marriages survive the revelation? Morning light filtered through the glass floor panels of our bungalow, casting rippling patterns across our bed. I watched tiny fish dart beneath us, their shadows playing across Tom's sleeping face. He looked peaceful, untroubled by the thoughts that had kept me awake most of the night. My phone showed several missed messages from Rachel, confirming the night dive arrangements. She had also sent detailed instructions about what to wear and bring, her scientific thoroughness evident in every bullet point. The resort's morning yoga session was already underway on the beach when I slipped out of our bungalow. Instead of joining the class, I found myself walking toward the research center. The island was different at this hour, quieter, more real somehow. Staff members were setting up for the day, their efficient movements lacking the theatrical quality they adopted around guests. I hadn't planned to go to the research center. My feet just carried me there, as if drawn by some invisible force. Through the windows, I could see Rachel already at work, bent over a microscope while James stood at a whiteboard covered in complex equations. They looked like a scientific power couple from a documentary, completely in their element, totally absorbed in their work. "Good morning." Rachel's voice startled me. She had looked up from her microscope and spotted me through the window. "You're up early. Come in. I'll show you what we're working on." Before I could make an excuse, she was opening the door, beckoning me inside. The research center smelled of salt water and coffee, with an underlying hint of analytical chemicals. James acknowledged me with a warm smile before returning to his equations. "This is fascinating," Rachel said, gesturing to her microscope. "We're observing coral polyp behavior under different pH conditions. Would you like to take a look?" I found myself leaning over the microscope, watching the tiny creatures she had described. Rachel's enthusiasm was contagious as she explained their research, her hands moving animatedly as she talked about ocean acidification and its effects on coral reproduction. "Coffee?" James offered, appearing beside us with 3 steaming mugs. "Rachel mentioned you're interested in environmental law. I'd love to get your perspective on some of the policy implications of our findings." The next hour passed in a blur of scientific discussion and legal theory. I was surprised to find myself enjoying the conversation, appreciating the way James and Rachel built on each other's ideas. They had a seamless way of communicating, finishing each other's sentences without seeming rehearsed. "There you are!" Tom's voice came from the doorway. He was still in his sleep clothes, hair tousled, looking slightly confused to find me in the research center. "I woke up and you were gone." "Emma was helping us analyze some behavioral data," Rachel explained, though that wasn't exactly true. "Actually, I'm glad you're both here, about tonight's dive." She pulled out a tablet, showing us weather forecasts and tide charts. "Conditions should be perfect. The moon will be bright enough to create amazing effects in the water, but not so bright that it drowns out the bioluminescence." Tom moved closer to study the charts, his shoulder brushing against Rachel's. I watched James watch them, noting the slight tightening around his eyes. Did he see it too? The easy familiarity in their body language? The way they unconsciously mirrored each other's movements? "I thought we could start at the northern reef," Rachel continued, zooming in on a map. "There's a colony of soft corals there that produce an incredible bioluminescent display. Then we can drift with the current toward the deeper channels where—" Actually," I heard myself say, "I've been thinking about the night dive. I'd like to do it properly. Get certified first, I mean. It doesn't feel right to take shortcuts with safety protocols." Rachel looked up, surprised. "Oh, we wouldn't be doing anything unsafe. James and I are both certified instructors and we'd stay in shallow water." "Still," I insisted, meeting her eyes, "I'd prefer to wait until I'm properly trained." The subtext hung in the air. I wasn't comfortable putting my life in her hands. Tom shot me a look I couldn't quite read. Disappointment? Frustration? But James was nodding. "That's very responsible," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Safety should always come first in diving. Perhaps we could do a sunset snorkel instead? The reef fish behavior at dusk is quite spectacular." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by guilt. Was I being paranoid? Overprotective? Rachel's suggestion had been perfectly reasonable, and here I was, creating tension where maybe none existed. "Sunset snorkel sounds perfect," Tom said quickly, smoothing over the awkward moment. But I saw the way his enthusiasm had dimmed, the slight slump in his shoulders. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. Tom and I had breakfast at the resort's buffet, making small talk about the weather and the fresh papaya. Neither of us mentioned what had happened at the research center. Instead, we planned our afternoon. A couple's massage, sometime by the infinity pool, normal honeymoon activities that didn't involve his ex-girlfriend or her husband. During our massage, I tried to lose myself in the rhythmic movements of the therapist's hands, the sound of waves breaking on the beach below. But my mind kept drifting to the research center, to the way Tom and Rachel had bent over the tablet together, to the look in James's eyes as he watched them. "Your shoulders are very tense," the massage therapist murmured. "Try to relax." "Easier said than done." After the massage, we lounged by the pool, ordering overpriced cocktails and pretending to read our books. I kept stealing glances at Tom over the top of my novel, wondering what he was thinking. Was he disappointed about the night dive? Did he wish I was more adventurous, more like Rachel? Penny for your thoughts, Tom said suddenly, lowering his book. I considered deflecting, making some comment about the plot of my novel. Instead, I asked, "Are you mad about this morning?" He set his book aside completely, turning to face me. Not mad, just confused, I guess. You were so excited about seeing bioluminescence when we were planning this trip. What changed? What changed? You invited your ex-girlfriend to be our personal guide without asking me. She showed up with her seemingly perfect husband and their brilliant research and their underwater wedding photos. Everything changed, but I couldn't say that. Instead, I said, I just want to do things properly. Racing into advanced diving activities without proper training isn't smart, no matter who's leading the expedition. Tom was quiet for a moment, watching a group of children playing in the shallow end of the pool. Rachel knows what she's doing. You know, she wouldn't suggest anything dangerous. That's not the point, I said, trying to keep my voice level. This isn't about Rachel's qualifications. It's about my comfort level. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't really understand. How could he? He had spent years diving with Rachel during their college days, trusting her completely both above and below the water. Of course, he couldn't see why I might hesitate. The afternoon sun was intense, making the water in the infinity pool shimmer, like liquid diamonds. Around us, other honeymoon couples took selfies, ordered drinks, lived their uncomplicated vacation lives. I envied their simplicity. I should go check my work emails, Tom said eventually, standing up. Want to meet for dinner later? I knew he didn't really have work emails to check. This was his way of creating space when conversations got difficult. Sure, I said, watching him gather his things. The beach restaurant? He nodded, bent to kiss my cheek, and walked away. I watched him until he disappeared around the corner, noting how his path took him suspiciously close to the research center. Alone by the pool, I pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. Rachel's profile was still there, a carefully curated collection of underwater photographs and research updates. I scrolled further back than I had before, past her wedding photos, past conference presentations and award ceremonies. And there it was, a photo from 6 years ago. Rachel and Tom in diving gear, holding up their certification cards, grinning, at the camera with the easy intimacy of a couple in love. The caption read, "Another successful dive with my favorite buddy. Can't wait for our next underwater adventure." I stared at their younger faces, noting the way Tom's arm wrapped around Rachel's waist, the way she leaned into him so naturally. They looked perfect together, two adventurous souls sharing a passion for the ocean. A shadow fell across my phone screen. I looked up to find James standing there, 2 coconut drinks in his hands. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, offering me one of the drinks. "Rachel and Tom are reviewing some underwater footage from this morning's survey. I thought you might like some company." I accepted the coconut, noting that he hadn't waited for my response before sitting down. "Thanks. Don't you need to be reviewing the footage too?" James took a long sip from his coconut before answering. "Sometimes it's good to step back, get a different perspective." He paused, then added, "Nice call about the night dive, by the way. Rachel can get enthusiastic about sharing her expertise. She forgets not everyone has her comfort level with the ocean." There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely. "How long have you and Rachel been married?" 18 months, he said, smiling slightly. "Though we dated for 2 years before that. Met at a conference in Australia. She was presenting her research on coral spawning patterns, and I was completely captivated. By the research, of course," he added with a wry smile. "Of course," I echoed, thinking about the underwater wedding photos. Must be amazing, working together, sharing the same passion. James was quiet for a moment, watching the horizon where the ocean met the sky. "It is, most of the time. but it can be intense. Sometimes I wonder if we spend too much time in our own little scientific bubble. He turned to look at me directly. How did you and Tom meet? At a coffee shop, I said, the memory making me smile despite everything. I spilled my latte all over his laptop. He was so nice about it, even though I probably destroyed hours of work. We ended up talking for hours. A coffee shop, James Dees repeated thoughtfully. Very normal, very human. He finished his coconut and stood up. Well, I should get back. Thanks for the company, Emma, and keep your eyes open under the water tonight. Sometimes the most interesting observations aren't the ones we're meant to be studying. He walked away, leaving me to puzzle over his words. The coconut in. My hand was still half full, the sweet liquid now tasting slightly bitter. The afternoon stretched ahead, hours to fill before the sunset snorkel. I thought about going to find Tom, but the idea of watching him and Rachel analyze underwater footage made my stomach clench. Instead, I went back to our bungalow, planning to take a nap before the evening's activities. But sleep wouldn't come. I lay on the bed, watching fish swim beneath the glass floor panels, thinking about James's words. What had he meant about keeping my eyes open? What was he seeing that made him seek me out for that conversation? The sun was starting its descent when Tom finally returned to our bungalow. His eyes were bright with excitement as he showed me some of the footage they'd reviewed. Coral spawning events, fish behaviors, evidence of successful restoration projects. Rachel says the sunset should be perfect for the snorkel, he said as we got ready. The light at this time of day really brings out the colors of the reef, Rachel says. Those two words were becoming the soundtrack to our honeymoon. As we walked to the meeting point, I noticed James was absent. Is your husband joining us? I asked Rachel as she handed out snorkel gear. He has a video conference with some research sponsors, she explained, helping Tom adjust his mask. Time zones make scheduling tricky. So it would be just the three of us. Perfect. The sun was a giant orange disk touching the horizon as we entered the water. Rachel led us along the reef, pointing out things we would have missed on our own. A moray eel peering from its cave, an octopus changing colors to match the coral, pairs of fish performing their evening courtship dances. Despite my reservations, it was beautiful. The dying sunlight created an otherworldly atmosphere, casting long shadows that made the coral formations look like underwater cities. Schools of fish moved around us in synchronized patterns, their scales catching the light, like thousands of tiny mirrors. I was hanging back slightly, watching Tom and Rachel swim ahead when I saw it. They had stopped to observe something on the reef, their bodies close together as Rachel pointed out some detail. As they hovered there, suspended in the golden water, Tom's hand brushed against Rachel's arm, just for a moment, so brief I might have imagined it. But I saw Rachel's slight start, the way she immediately put more distance between them. That's when I knew. Whatever was happening here, whatever, currents were pulling at us beneath the surface. It wasn't just in my imagination. And James's words suddenly made perfect sense. Sometimes the most interesting observations aren't the ones we're meant to be studying. The sun slipped below the horizon, taking its golden light with it. In the gathering dusk, the reef began to change, showing hints of the bioluminescence we might have seen on the night dive. But I was no longer interested in the marine life around us. I was watching a different kind of natural phenomenon unfold, the complex dance of four people trying to navigate the waters of past and present, love and loss, truth and denial. As we swam back to shore, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would have a real conversation with James. Because if anyone understood what was really happening here, it would be the man who had chosen to marry a woman whose heart might not be entirely her own. Sleep eluded me that night. The gentle sound of waves beneath our bungalow, usually so soothing, felt like a whispered conversation I couldn't quite hear. Tom slept peacefully beside me, untroubled by the undercurrents I'd witnessed during our sunset snorkel. His hand had brushed Rachel's arm. She had pulled away. Such tiny moments, but they echoed in my mind like thunder. Dawn found me walking along the beach, the sand cool and damp beneath my feet. The island was still sleeping, save for a few early rising staff members preparing for another day in paradise. The research center's lights were already on, a warm glow in the growing light. As I approached, I saw James through the window, alone at his desk, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups. My knock on the door seemed too loud in the morning quiet. James looked up, unsurprised to see me, as if he'd been expecting this visit. "Emma," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Coffee?" The research center's coffee machine was a serious piece of equipment, clearly well used by scientists working late nights. James prepared 2 cups with the precise attention to detail I'd come to expect from him. The rich aroma filled the space between us, making this surreal moment feel almost normal. "Rachel's at the Southern Reef," he said, answering my unasked question. "Early morning water quality readings." Tom offered to help with the photography. Of course he did. I wrapped my hands around the warm coffee mug, gathering courage. "James, about yesterday. You saw it too, then." It wasn't a question. He sat down across from me, his own coffee untouched. "The moment in the water." "It might have been nothing," I said, but we both knew I didn't believe that. James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Did you know Rachel and I had our first real conversation about Tom 3 days before our wedding?" She told me everything: how they met in college, their diving adventures, why she left. He traced the rim of his coffee cup with one finger. She said she chose her career over love, that she regretted hurting him but not the choice itself. My throat felt tight. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand what we're dealing with." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Rachel loves me. I don't doubt that. But Tom represents the road not taken, the what-if that never quite faded." The morning light was growing stronger, casting long shadows across the research center's floor. Through the window, I could see the ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon, beautiful and dangerous in its depths. "When she heard you were coming here," James continued, "she was excited about showing you the reefs. But when she mentioned it to Tom..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've never seen her quite so animated about a visiting couple before." "Does it bother you?" I asked, watching his face. "Seeing them together? It should, shouldn't it?" He smiled ruefully. "But what bothers me more is watching Rachel try so hard to prove she's completely over him. The way she overcompensates, keeps things almost too professional. It's like watching someone perform a role they haven't quite mastered." A school of fish darted past the window, their silver scales catching the morning light. "Yesterday, in the water," I said slowly, "when Tom touched her arm." She pulled away. James finished. Too quickly, too obviously, like someone remembering their lines too late. He finally took a sip of his coffee, grimacing at its coldness. "The thing about Rachel is, she's brilliant at studying patterns in nature, but she's terrible at hiding her own. What do we do?" The question came out smaller than I intended, more vulnerable than I wanted to sound. James stood up, walking to the window. "Do you know what happens when you try to force 2 pieces of coral to grow together? They either reject each other completely, or one dominates the other until it dies. But if you give them space, let them grow naturally." He turned to face me. "Sometimes they find their own way to coexist." "That's a very scientific way of looking at marriage," I said, not sure whether to be impressed or disturbed by his analogy. "Science is what I know," he shrugged. It's how I make sense of things. Rachel's the same way. It's why we work together, most of the time. The sound of voices outside made us both turn. Through the window, we could see Rachel and Tom returning from their morning expedition, carrying sampling equipment and cameras. They were walking close together, heads bent in conversation, completely absorbed in whatever they were discussing. "They're talking about coral spawning patterns," James said, but his voice held a note of uncertainty I hadn't heard before. "Or water temperature variations. Or remembering what it felt like to be 22 and in love with nothing. But ocean between them in their dreams," I finished quietly. He nodded, his expression pained. "Rachel chose her career over Tom once before. She's built this incredible life, this reputation in our field. She wouldn't throw that away." "But?" I prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice. "But sometimes," he said, watching his wife laugh at something Tom had said, "I wonder if she's trying to convince herself as much as everyone else." They were getting closer to the research center now. Rachel's hair was coming loose from its practical braid, curling in the humid air. Tom was gesturing animatedly, probably explaining something about camera angles or lighting techniques. They looked like they belonged together, two pieces of the same puzzle. "We should go," I said, standing up. "Before they—" The door opened, bringing with it the sound of their laughter and the fresh scent of ocean air. Rachel stopped short when she saw us, her smile faltering slightly. "James, Emma, you're up early." "Just discussing some legal implications of the research," James said smoothly, stepping away from the window. Emma had some interesting insights about international water rights. Tom came up behind Rachel, still holding his underwater camera. "Really? I didn't know you were interested in marine law, Em." The nickname felt wrong somehow, too casual for this moment. "There's a lot we're all learning about each other, isn't there?" The tension in the room was suddenly thick enough to cut. Rachel moved to her workstation, busying herself with equipment. James started gathering papers from his desk. Tom looked between us all, sensing something was off, but not quite understanding what. "Actually," Rachel said brightly, too brightly, "I was thinking we could try something different today. There's a beautiful wreck site about an hour's boat ride from here. The coral growth on it is fascinating, and the fish populations." "I can't today," I interrupted. "I promised Sophie I'd video call her. Time difference and all that." "Oh." Rachel's disappointment seemed genuine. "Well, maybe Tom would still like to." "I'll stay with Emma," Tom said quickly. "We haven't had much alone time lately. Maybe tomorrow?" The look that passed between them was brief, but loaded with unspoken words. James saw it too. I felt him tense beside me. "Of course," Rachel said, her professional mask sliding back into place. "Tomorrow, then. James and I should focus on data analysis today anyway." We left the research center feeling like we were fleeing a crime scene, though nothing had actually happened. The morning sun was fully up now, turning the beach into a dazzling strip of white gold. Other guests were starting to emerge, claiming the best spots by the pool, ordering breakfast, living their normal vacation lives. "What were you really talking about with James?" Tom asked as we walked back to our bungalow. "Exactly what he said," I replied, not looking at him. "Marine law, conservation zones, the usual honeymoon topics." He caught my arm, gentle but firm, making me face him. "Emma, what's going on? You've been acting strange ever since Rachel arrived." "Have I?" I met his eyes, challenging him. "Or have you been acting strange and I'm just noticing?" "What's that supposed to mean?" "You tell me, Tom. Why did you really want Rachel to be part of our honeymoon?" A couple walked past us on the beach, their happy chatter a stark contrast to our tension. Tom waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. "She's doing important work here. I thought you'd be interested in learning about it, that's all." "Is it?" Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to recapture something. Or someone. The words hung between us like storm clouds. Tom's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, denial, anger, and finally, something that looked dangerously like guilt. "That's ridiculous," he said, but he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Rachel is married. I'm married. To you? We're just colleagues, friends. Friends who share a history. Friends who still move in sync underwater. Friends who can't quite seem to maintain professional distance without making it obvious they're trying to maintain professional distance." "You're seeing things that aren't there," Tom insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Then why did you flinch when she pulled away from you yesterday? Why do you light up every time she suggests another expedition? Why can't you seem to spend one day of our honeymoon just being my husband instead of Rachel's underwater photography assistant?" The questions came out in a rush, all the thoughts and fears I'd been holding back. Tom took a step back, literally and figuratively. "I think we both need some space right now," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I'm going to go. I don't know, take some pictures of the sunrise or something." "You mean you're going to go find Rachel and tell her about our fight?" I said quietly. He didn't deny it. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone on the beach with the morning sun beating down on my shoulders. I watched him go, remembering James's words about coral and natural growth patterns. But we weren't coral, adapting to our environment over centuries. We were people, with hearts that could break in an instant and trust that could erode faster than any reef. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the real call from Sophie that I'd used as an excuse. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But maybe talking to someone completely removed from this situation was exactly what I needed. Finding a quiet spot on the beach, I answered the call. Sophie's familiar face appeared on my screen, her smile fading as she saw my expression. "Emma? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," I said, feeling tears start to form. "Just my husband's ex-girlfriend and all the feelings he apparently never quite got over." And there, on a perfect beach in paradise, I finally let myself cry while my best friend listened from halfway across the world, and the ocean kept its secrets about what would happen next in this complicated dance of hearts and histories. Sophie's voice crackled through my phone speaker, full of concern and barely contained fury. "He did what?" "Emma, I'm booking a flight right now. This is not okay." I wiped my eyes, watching a group of tourists set up their beach chairs nearby. "Don't be ridiculous. You can't fly to the Maldives. Watch me. I have miles saved up and your husband needs a serious reality check." I could hear her keyboard clicking in the background. Who invites their ex to their honeymoon? Who does that? The morning sun was getting stronger, forcing me to move into the shade of a palm tree. "He says it's just about the research, that I'm seeing things that aren't there." "Are you, though?" Sophie's typing stopped. "Tell me exactly what you've observed. Not what you think it means, just what you've actually seen." I closed my eyes, letting the memories surface. The way they move together underwater, like they've never forgotten each other's rhythms. The little glances when they think no one's watching. Yesterday, he touched her arm, and she pulled away so quickly it was like she was afraid of what might happen if she didn't. And what does her husband say about all this? James. I paused, considering our early morning conversation. He sees it too. He's just more scientific about it. Like he's studying their behavior the same way they study their coral reefs. Sophie was quiet for a moment. That's either incredibly evolved or deeply sad. I can't decide which. A shadow fell across my phone screen. I looked up to find James standing there, 2 coffee cups in his hands again. Sophie, I need to go. Please don't book any flights. I'll call you later. Emma. Sophie's voice was serious now. Remember what we talked about at your bachelorette party? About not settling? About knowing your worth? I remember, I said softly. I'll call you tonight. James waited until I ended the call before offering me one of the coffee cups. Your friend sounds protective. She's known me since college, I said, accepting the coffee. She was there. For all my bad relationships before Tom. She's the one who convinced me I deserved better. And do you? James settled onto the sand beside me, his own coffee untouched. Deserve better? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. They're at the wreck site, aren't they? He nodded. Rachel said you had a call. Tom offered to help with photography again. His tone was carefully neutral, but I could hear the strain beneath it. Doesn't it bother you? I turned to look at him directly. How can you be so calm about this? James drew patterns in the sand with his free hand, abstract swirls that reminded me of water currents. Did you know that certain species of fish can change their gender if their mate dies? Nature finds ways to adapt, to survive. Sometimes that means accepting things we don't want to face. We're not fish, James. No, he agreed, smoothing away his sand patterns. We're much more complicated. Fish don't lie to themselves about their feelings. They don't try to maintain professional boundaries with their exes while secretly wondering what might have been. A breeze carried the sound of laughter from the resort's pool area. Normal honeymoon sounds, normal vacation joy. Everything I should have been experiencing right now. When Rachel first suggested this arrangement, James continued, I told myself it was just her scientific enthusiasm. She gets excited about sharing her research, especially with people who understand its importance. But then I saw how she lit up when Tom agreed to come help with the photography. Why did you let it happen? I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since our earlier conversation. The same reason you did, he said simply. Because sometimes loving someone means giving them space to figure out what they really want, even if what they want might not be you. His words hit me like a physical blow. I don't want to lose him. I don't want to lose her either. James finally took a sip of his coffee, grimacing at its temperature. But we can't keep pretending this is just about research and underwater photography. So what do we do? Well, he said, standing up and brushing sand from his clothes, they're due back in about an hour. We could sit here feeling sorry for ourselves, or we could take the resort's other boat out to the wreck site. See exactly what's so fascinating about it. I stared at him. Are you suggesting we spy on them? I'm suggesting we stop sitting on the beach wondering what's happening and find out for ourselves. Sometimes the only way past fear is through it. My heart was pounding as I considered his proposal. Won't they see us coming? The wreck site is large, with multiple entry points, and the water visibility is excellent today. He offered me his hand. What do you say, Emma? Ready to do some research of our own? 20 minutes later, we were on a small boat heading out to sea. James had arranged everything with quiet efficiency, explaining to the boat captain that we wanted to observe some specific coral formations. If he thought it was strange that two people from different couples were going diving together, he didn't show it. The ocean was calm, the water so clear we could see fish swimming beneath us. James helped me with my diving gear, his movements precise and professional. We had decided to stay on the opposite side of the wreck from where Rachel and Tom were supposed to be working. Remember, James said as we prepared to enter the water, we're not confronting them, we're just observing, like scientists. The water welcomed us with its familiar embrace. The wreck site was impressive, a small cargo vessel that had become an artificial reef, covered in corals and teeming with marine life. Under different circumstances, I would have been fascinated by its transformation from human artifact to natural wonder. James gestured for me to follow him along the ship's outer hull. We moved slowly, careful not to create too much disturbance in the water. As we rounded the stern, we heard the distinctive sound of underwater cameras clicking. They were there, about 30 feet away, completely absorbed in their work. Or what looked like work. Rachel was pointing out something on the coral-encrusted deck, her movements animated even underwater. Tom was photographing whatever she was, showing him, but between shots, their bodies drifted closer together than strictly necessary. We watched as Rachel demonstrated proper research photography techniques, her hands guiding Tom's on the camera. Even through the distortion of water and distance, I could see the intimacy in their interaction. This wasn't just professional collaboration. This was muscle memory, their bodies remembering a dance they had perfected years ago. Beside me, James's breathing through his regulator became slightly irregular. I glanced at him, seeing my own, pain reflected in his eyes behind his mask, but he made no move to interrupt them, staying hidden in the shadow of the ship's hull. Then, it happened. As Rachel reached to adjust something on Tom's camera, their faces came close together, too. Close, for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. They hung there in the blue water, their eyes meeting through their masks. Neither pulled away. James's hand found mine underwater, squeezing hard. I squeezed back, grateful for the anchor to reality as I watched my husband almost kiss his ex-girlfriend on their secret morning dive. Almost, but not quite. At the last possible second, Rachel jerked back, her sudden movement startling a school of fish nearby. She gestured frantically toward the surface, then began ascending quickly. Too quickly. Tom followed her, leaving, their research equipment floating beside the wreck. James tugged my hand, pointing to a different ascent route. We surfaced far enough away that they wouldn't notice us immediately, but close enough to hear their voices carrying across the water. "We can't," Rachel was saying, her voice shaking. "This isn't. I'm married. You're married. This is wrong." "Rach," Tom's voice was pleading, "we need to talk about what just happened." "Nothing happened." The shrillness in her voice betrayed her words. "Nothing can happen. I made my choice years ago. I chose my career, my research. I chose James. And I chose Emma," Tom said. But he didn't sound convinced. "I love her." "Do you?" Rachel's question was barely audible over the gentle splash of waves. "Or did you marry her because she was safe? Because she wasn't going to leave you for a research grant on the other side of the world?" The silence that followed her words was deafening. James and I floated in our hidden spot, listening to the sound of hearts breaking across the "Sure, let's go back," James whispered to me. "We've seen enough." The return journey to the resort was silent. James drove the boat while I sat in the stern, watching our wake dissipate into the endless blue. Neither of us had said a word since leaving the wreck site, but we didn't need to. We had witnessed something we couldn't unsee, something that would change everything. Back on the beach, James finally spoke. "They'll be back soon. We need to decide what to do." Confront them? The idea made my stomach churn. "And say what? That we spied on them? That we saw them almost kiss?" He shook his head. "No, I think we need to let this play out. They need to make their own choices." "Even if those choices destroy us?" James looked out at the horizon, where our spouses were presumably heading back in their own boat. "Maybe what we're really afraid of is that they've already made their choices, long before any of us came to this island." The sun was high overhead now, turning the beach into a dazzling expanse of white. Other resort guests were going about. Their days, swimming, sunbathing, living their uncomplicated lives. None of them knew that just offshore, 4 hearts were caught in a tide that threatened to pull them all under. "I should go," I said, standing up. "I need to. I don't. No. Process this." James nodded, understanding. Emma, whatever happens next, remember, you didn't cause this. Sometimes the ocean just pulls things back to where they started, no matter how far they've drifted. I walked back to our bungalow in a daze, my wet hair dripping onto the wooden walkway. Inside, everything looked exactly as we'd left it this morning. Tom's camera bag by the door, my book on the bedside table, our honeymoon clothes hanging in the closet. All these normal things that now felt like props in someone else's love story. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Back soon. Need to help Rachel clean equipment. Can we talk later? I stared at the message until the words blurred. Clean? Equipment. Right. Because that's what almost kisses need. Proper equipment maintenance. Sitting on our bed, watching tropical fish swim beneath the glass floor panels, I thought about choices. Rachel had chosen her career over Tom years ago. Tom had chosen to marry me. I had chosen to trust him when he said inviting his ex on our honeymoon was just about the research. But watching them underwater today, seeing the way they moved together, the way they almost crossed a line that would change everything, I realized something. Sometimes the choices we think we've made aren't really choices at all. Sometimes they're just temporary detours on a path that was set long before we knew where it was leading. The question now was, what choice would I make, knowing what I knew? And more importantly, what choice would Tom make when he finally admitted to himself what that almost kiss really meant? The waves lapped beneath our bungalow, their rhythm unchanging despite the chaos they had witnessed. Somewhere on this island, James was probably asking himself the same questions about Rachel. And somewhere between here and the wreck site, my husband and his ex-girlfriend were cleaning equipment and pretending they hadn't just reopened a door they'd thought was closed forever. I picked up my phone again, opening Sophie's last message. Remember your worth. 3 simple words that suddenly carried the weight of my entire future. The sun continued its journey across the sky, marking time in a paradise that no longer felt like one. Soon, Tom would return. Soon, we would have to face what had happened today. Soon, choices would have to be made. But for now, I sat in our honeymoon bungalow, watching fish swim beneath my feet, and wondered how something as vast as the ocean could suddenly feel so suffocating. The afternoon stretched endlessly as I waited in our bungalow. I tried reading, sleeping, even mindlessly scrolling through social media. But nothing could distract me from the memory of what I'd witnessed at the wreck site. Every few minutes, I found myself checking my phone, though I wasn't sure what I was hoping to see. Another message from Tom making excuses? A text from James about how we should handle this? Or maybe I was just watching time crawl by, marking the minutes until my marriage either survived or shattered. The sound of footsteps on the wooden walkway made my heart jump. Tom appeared in the doorway, his hair still damp from the ocean, carrying his camera equipment. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. What do you say to someone who almost kissed their ex while you watched from the shadows of a shipwreck? Equipment's all cleaned and stored, he said finally, setting down his camera bag. Such a normal statement, as if this were any other day. Is that all you have to say? My voice came out steadier than I felt. He sank into the chair by the window, running his hands through his salt-stiffened hair. Emma, about this morning, when you said I was trying to recapture something with Rachel. Stop. I held up my hand. Before you say anything else, I need you to know something. I was there, Tom, at the wreck site. The color drained from his face. What? James and I took the other boat out. We saw everything. The words felt like glass in my throat, but I forced them out. The way you were with her. The almost kiss. Her panic when she realized what was happening. Tom stood up so quickly the chair scraped against the floor. You were spying on me? Really? That's what you're going to focus on? Not the fact that you almost kissed your ex-girlfriend on our honeymoon? He paced the length of our bungalow, his footsteps making the whole structure sway slightly over the water. Nothing happened. We stopped. She stopped. I corrected him. You were ready to cross that line. Don't pretend you weren't. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken truths. Outside, I could hear the gentle lap of waves against the stilts of our bungalow, the occasional call of a seabird, all these peaceful sounds that seemed to mock the chaos inside. I don't know what I was ready to do, Tom finally said, his voice quiet. It was like being underwater with her again. Everything felt familiar, like muscle memory. Muscle memory, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? He turned to face me, his expression pained. Emma, I love you. I married you. That hasn't changed. Hasn't it? Because from where I was watching, it looked a lot like you're still in love with Rachel. The words hung between us like storm clouds. Tom sank onto the edge of our bed, the same bed where we'd spent our first honeymoon nights wrapped in newlywed bliss. Now it felt like a dividing line between us. It's complicated, he began, but I cut him off. No, it's actually very simple. You either want to be married to me or you don't. You either love me completely or you're still holding on to feelings for Rachel. There's no complicated middle ground here, Tom. A knock at the door made us both jump. Through the glass panels, I could see James standing outside, his face grave. Tom swore under his breath. Come in, I called before Tom could object. James entered slowly, like someone approaching a wild animal. Rachel told me what happened at the wreck site, he said without preamble. She's packing her things. We're leaving tonight. What? Tom stood up again. You can't just leave. The research. The research can wait, James said firmly. This situation has become untenable. Where is she? Tom asked, and something in his tone made my stomach clench. Don't, James warned. She needs space. We all do. Tom moved toward the door, but James blocked his path. Move, James. Or what? James's voice was quiet but steel-edged. You'll go find my wife and tell her what? That you're sorry for. Almost kissing her? That you want to talk about old times? That you've suddenly realized you made a mistake marrying Emma? That's not... Tom started, but James cut him off. Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, you're about to destroy 2 marriages because you can't let go of the past. The tension in the room was suffocating. I watched these 2 men face off, one fighting to keep his wife, the other unable to admit what he really wanted. She left me, Tom said finally, his voice cracking. She chose her career over us. I never got to. To what? I asked, standing up. To process it? To get closure? Is that what this honeymoon was really about, Tom? Getting closure with Rachel? He turned to look at me, and the guilt in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. Oh, God, I whispered, sitting back down as the realization hit me. You knew she was here before we booked this resort, didn't you? This wasn't some lucky coincidence. You planned this. The silence that followed my accusation was answer enough. I need to talk to Rachel, Tom said, moving toward the door again. This time, James didn't try to stop him. Instead, he said quietly, She's at the North Beach. But Tom, if you go to her now, you're making a choice you can't take back. Tom paused in the doorway, his hand gripping the frame. For a moment, I thought he might turn around, might choose me, might save our marriage. Instead, he walked out without looking back. James and I stood in silence, listening to Tom's footsteps fade along the wooden walkway. Finally, James spoke. I'm sorry, Emma. I truly am. Did you know? I asked. When Rachel suggested this arrangement, did you know Tom had planned it? He shook his head. Not at first. But I found the email chain last night. Messages. Going back months. Tom reached out to her when he learned about our research here. They planned this whole thing, disguised as a professional collaboration. My legs felt weak. I sank onto the bed, our honeymoon bed, and tried to process what I was hearing. So this whole time, every dive, every research discussion, was their way of reconnecting without admitting that's what they were doing. James finished. They probably didn't plan for it to go this far. People rarely do. What do we do now? James moved to the window, looking out at the perfect tropical scene outside. Now we wait. They'll either come back and try to pretend nothing happened, or they'll finally admit the truth, I finished, that they never really got over each other. The sun was starting to set, painting the ocean in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere on this island, my husband was having a conversation with his ex-girlfriend that would determine all our futures. And all I could do was wait. I should go pack, James said softly. Whatever happens, Rachel and I are leaving tonight. This experiment has gone far enough. As he turned to leave, I called after him. James, thank you for being honest with me, for helping me see the truth. He smiled sadly. The truth was always there, Emma. Sometimes we just need someone else to help us look in the right direction. He paused at the door. You deserve better than being someone's second choice. Remember that. After he left, I sat on our bed, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. My wedding ring caught the fading light, sending little rainbow reflections across the wall. Such a small circle of metal to hold so many promises, so many dreams, so many lies. My phone buzzed. Another message from Sophie. Just checked flights. I can be there in 24 hours. Say the word. This time, I didn't tell her not to come. Instead, I typed, book it. I think my honeymoon just ended. The sun disappeared completely, leaving me alone in the growing darkness. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the resort coming alive for the evening, music from the beach bar, laughter from other honeymooners, the normal soundtrack of paradise. But somewhere on a beach on this same island, my husband was choosing between his past and his present. And somehow, I already knew which choice he would make. I picked up my suitcase and began to pack. Night had fallen on the island, bringing with it a silence that seemed to amplify every thought in my head. I'd finished packing an hour ago, my suitcase now sitting by the door like a sentinel marking the end of something. Sophie had sent my flight details, a red-eye from Mail International Airport that would take me far away from this paradise, turned purgatory. A soft knock on the door made me freeze. It wasn't Tom's knock. I'd memorized his rhythm over our years together. This was gentler, hesitant. Rachel stood outside, her face pale in the moonlight. She looked different than she had this morning. Smaller somehow, more vulnerable. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and her eyes were red-rimmed. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. When I didn't respond immediately, she added, "Please. I need to tell you something." I stepped aside, letting her enter. She moved to the center of the room, turning slowly to take in the evidence of my imminent departure. The packed suitcase, the empty closet, the bare bedside table. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "Shouldn't you be doing the same? James said you were packing." She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold something in. "I was. I am. But I needed to talk to you first. You deserve to know what happened on the beach." Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, to spare myself the details of whatever conversation she'd had with my husband. But a larger part needed to know. "Tell me." Rachel sank into the chair by the window, the same chair Tom had sat in hours earlier. "He found me on the North Beach, where I go to think sometimes. I was sitting in the sand, watching the waves and trying to figure out how everything had gotten so complicated. She paused, collecting her thoughts. I remained standing, unwilling to sit and make this feel like a friendly conversation. He started talking about college, about our diving adventures, about how perfect everything had been before I left for Australia. He said. She swallowed hard. He said maybe the universe was giving us a second chance. The words hit me like physical blows, but I forced myself to stay silent. I let him talk, Rachel continued. Let him get it all out, all the hurt, all the what-ifs, all the things he'd apparently been carrying around for years. And then I told him about the night before my wedding to James. This caught my attention. What about it? I was terrified, she admitted. Not because I didn't love James. I do. But because I was afraid I was making another choice that would haunt me like leaving Tom had. So I did something I'd never told anyone. I called Tom's number. My breath caught. The night? Before your wedding. She nodded. It was late in Seattle, but he answered. And do you know what he said? He told me he was shopping for engagement rings for you. He talked about how happy you made him, how excited he was to start a life with you. He sounded so sure. Tears were falling freely down her face now. That's when I knew I could marry James with my whole heart. Because Tom had found his happiness, his future. Or at least, I thought he had. Until he saw you again, I said softly. Until he saw me again, she agreed. But Emma, what he's feeling, what he thinks he's feeling, it's not real. It's nostalgia and unresolved feelings and the intoxication of being underwater together again. He's not in love with me. He's in love with the memory of who we were at 22. Did you tell him this on the beach? I tried. He didn't want to hear it. He kept talking about signs and fate and how seeing me again made him feel alive. She stood up abruptly, moving to the window. I asked him if he'd thought about what would happen after. After he blew up his marriage, after James and I divorced, after the excitement wore off and we had to deal with real life instead of this fantasy he'd built up. What did he say? He didn't have an answer. That's when I knew I had to come talk to you. She turned to face me. Emma, I'm not going to let Tom destroy his marriage because he's having a midlife crisis disguised as a second chance at first love. I'm not going to let him hurt you like this. I think it's a little late for that, I said, gesturing to my packed suitcase. No, it's not. Her voice was firm now. Because you need to know something else. When I left Tom on the beach, he was still talking about fate and missed opportunities. But do you know what he wasn't talking about? You, his wife, the woman he married. He wasn't talking about losing you or fighting for you or how this would affect you. He was completely absorbed in his own feelings, his own narrative. And that's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to make you see the truth. The man on that beach tonight? That's not the Tom who fell in love with you. That's not the Tom who was so excited about marrying you that he had to tell his ex-girlfriend all about it the night before her wedding. That's a man who's lost in a fantasy and he needs to wake up. She moved toward the door, then paused. James and I are leaving on the midnight boat. I've already told the research center I'm taking a sabbatical. But before I go, I want you to know something. Tom didn't plan this honeymoon around me. James found the emails. No, she interrupted. James found emails from March, when Tom reached out after learning we were here. But you want to know something interesting? I checked the resort booking records. You and Tom booked this honeymoon last December, 3 months before he knew I was here. The implications of this hit me like a wave. So when he said it was a coincidence, he was telling the truth, at least about that. She opened the door, letting in the warm night air. The rest? That's something he needs to figure out for himself. And he needs to do it without me around to cloud his judgment. Rachel! I called as she started to leave. "Why are you telling me all this?" She turned back, her silhouette framed in the doorway. "Because 8 years ago, I made a choice between love and my career. It was the right choice for me, but I hurt Tom deeply in the process. I won't let him use that old wound as an excuse to hurt you now." After she left, I stood in the middle of our bungalow, letting her words sink in. The night breeze carried the sound of waves and distant music, the eternal soundtrack of this island paradise. Somewhere out there, my husband was still on a icy beach, lost in memories of his first love. And somewhere else, his first love was packing to leave with her husband, choosing once again to walk away from Tom Wilson. My phone buzzed, a message from James. "Rachel told me she talked to you. We're leaving in an hour. Whatever you decide to do next, remember that you're not the one who needs to fix this." I walked out onto our private deck, letting the moonlight wash over me. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, dark and mysterious and full of secrets. Just like the human heart, Sophie would be landing tomorrow afternoon. My own flight was booked for midnight, the same time Rachel and James would be leaving. All I had to do was get on it, go home, start figuring out what came next. But something Rachel said kept echoing in my mind. The man on that beach wasn't the Tom who fell in love with me. He wasn't the Tom who excitedly told his ex about buying my engagement ring. He was lost in a fantasy, trying to rewrite a past that couldn't be changed. The question was, did I love him enough to wait for him to find his way back to reality? A shooting star streaked across the sky, its brief brilliance reflecting off the water. In college, Tom and I used to make wishes on shooting stars, always telling each other what we'd wished for, even though that was supposed to prevent them from coming true. I wondered what he was wishing for tonight, alone on his beach with his memories and regrets. My phone buzzed again. Tom this time. "I'm ready to talk. If you'll listen." I stared at the message for a long time, watching the cursor blink. Behind me, my packed suitcase waited by the door. Ahead of me, the ocean kept its counsel, offering no easy answers. Finally, I typed, "I'll listen, but not tonight. Rachel and James are leaving at midnight. You need to decide who you're going to be after they're gone. The man who got lost in a fantasy, or the man I married. I'll be here in the morning if you want to talk to that second guy." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then, I called Sophie. "Change of plans," I said when she answered. "Don't get on that flight yet." "Emma," she started, her voice full of concern, but I cut her off. "I need 24 hours to see if the man I married finds his way back from whatever time warp he's been living in. If he doesn't, well, that's what best friends and escape flights are for, right?" After I hung up, I unpacked my suitcase. Not everything, just enough for one more day in paradise. One more day to see if love was stronger than nostalgia, if reality could overcome fantasy, if the man I married could find his way back from the beach where he'd gotten lost in memories of a different life. The midnight boat would leave soon, carrying Rachel and James away from this island and the chaos their presence had created. But the ripples of their visit would remain, like waves spreading out from a stone dropped in still water. Tomorrow would bring either an ending or a new beginning. Tonight, under a sky full of stars, all I could do was wait and hope that sometimes love means giving someone space to remember why they chose you in the first place. I settled into a deck chair, watching the lights of the midnight boat appear on the horizon. Soon it would carry away the past, leaving Tom and me alone with our present and whatever future we decided to build, together or apart. The choice, like so many things on this island, would have to wait for the morning light. Sunrise found me still on the deck, wrapped in one of the resort's plush robes. I dozed off and on throughout the night, watching the midnight boat disappear into the darkness, its lights growing smaller until they merged with the stars. Tom hadn't come back to our bungalow. The research center's lights had stayed on until dawn, suggesting he'd found refuge there among the papers and specimens that had brought us all to this moment. The morning air was unusually still, as if the island itself was holding its breath. No early morning yoga class on the beach today. A sign posted at the activity center announced that rough waters were expected later. The horizon showed no sign of the predicted storm, but I'd learned that in the tropics, weather could change as quickly as hearts. My phone showed no new messages from Tom, but there was one from Rachel sent just before midnight. We're safely away. I meant what I said, all of it. Whatever happens next, be gentle with yourself. The resort staff delivered breakfast exactly at 7, as they had every morning of our honeymoon. The sight of 2 place settings made my throat tight. I left, the covered dishes untouched, unable to face the ritual of a honeymoon breakfast alone. Instead, I found myself walking toward the research center. The doors were locked, but through the windows, I could see evidence of Tom's night. Empty coffee cups, his camera bag open on a desk, papers scattered as if he'd been searching through them for answers. He left about an hour ago. I turned to find Marcus, the center's director, standing behind me with a ring of keys. He'd been friendly but distant during our stay, professional enough not to comment on the obvious tension between his researchers and the honeymooning couple. Did he say where he was going? Marcus unlocked the door, the air conditioning hitting us with a blast of cold air. No, but he asked some questions about the tides. There's a small cove on the eastern side of the island. We call it Morning Reef. The coral there is particularly beautiful at sunrise. I knew the place. Rachel had mentioned wanting to show it to us before everything imploded. Is it safe to swim there alone? The water's calm in the mornings, Marcus said, gathering the empty coffee cups. Though we're expecting some weather later today. He paused, then added gently, sometimes the hardest dive is the one where we face ourselves. I left him to his cleanup, following the eastern path through the jungle interior of the island. The morning humidity was already intense, making my sundress cling to my skin. Birds called from the dense canopy above, their songs mixing with the distant sound of waves. Morning Reef was exactly as Marcus had described. A small, protected cove where the coral grew close to the surface, creating an underwater garden visible even from the beach. Tom sat at the water's edge, still in yesterday's clothes, his feet bare in the gentle surf. His underwater camera lay beside him, unused. He didn't look up as I approached, but his shoulders tensed, acknowledging my presence. I sat down beside him, leaving space between us, and waited. I've been trying to figure out when exactly I lost my mind, he finally said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Was it when I first saw Rachel again? When we went diving together? Or was it earlier? When I found out she was here and let myself believe it meant something? When did you lose your mind? I asked quietly. Or when did you lose yourself? He picked up a piece of coral from the sand, turning it over in his hands. Rachel told me something last night that kept me awake. She said I wasn't in love with her. I was in love with who we were at 22, with the possibility of a different life. And what do you think? I think. He tossed the coral into the water, watching the ripples spread. I think I've been carrying around this weight for 8 years. This idea that when Rachel chose her career over me, it meant I wasn't enough, that I wasn't worth choosing. The morning sun was getting stronger, turning the water into a mirror of light. In the shallows, tropical fish darted through the coral, unconcerned with human drama. So, when you saw her here, I said, it wasn't about love at all. It was about proving something to yourself. Maybe. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep or both. Or maybe it was about finally letting go of that weight, because watching her with James, seeing how perfectly they fit together in their world of research and discovery, I realized something. What? She was right to choose her career, to choose that life, because it's who she is, who she was always meant to be. And I was right to choose you, to choose our life. I just forgot that. For a minute. A minute? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. You almost kissed her, Tom. You talked about fate and second chances. You were ready to throw away our marriage for a fantasy. He flinched. I know. God, Emma, I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that right if you'll let me. But first, I need you to understand something. From his pocket, he pulled out a folded piece of paper, an email printout. I found this in the research center's files last night. It's from Rachel to James, sent the morning after that phone call, the one she told you about from the night before her wedding. He handed me the paper, crisp despite its age. Rachel's words filled the page. My love, I did something last night that I need to tell you about. I called Tom. Not because I was having doubts about us, never that, but because I needed to close that chapter completely before starting our story. He told me about Emma, about how she makes him laugh, how she challenges him, how she loves him exactly as he is. He talked for an hour about the ring he's going to buy her, the life they're going to build. And listening to him, I finally understood something. Sometimes the loves we think we'll never get over are just preparing us for the loves we're meant to find. Tom and I loved each other with the passion of first love, but you and I love each other with the depth of true partnership. He's found that with Emma, just as I've found it with you. Tomorrow, I'll walk down the aisle knowing that all my choices have led me exactly where I'm supposed to be. With you, in our world of science and discovery and purpose. See you at sunset. I'll be the one in white, ready to start our greatest research project yet, the rest of our lives. All my love, Rachel. The paper trembled in my hands. Where did you find this? In a folder of personal correspondence James kept in his desk. I shouldn't have read it, but once I started... Tom took the paper back, folding it carefully. Emma, that phone call? The one where I told Rachel about wanting to marry you? I meant every word, just like I meant every word of our vows 2 weeks ago. Then what happened here, on this island? He was quiet for a long moment, watching the fish swim through the coral garden. I got lost in a memory, in the idea that maybe the universe was giving me a chance to prove I was worth choosing after all. But Rachel was right. It wasn't real. It was just nostalgia and unresolved feelings and the intoxication of being underwater together again. Those are her words, I noted. What are yours? My words? He turned to face me fully. My words are, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Emma, for letting a ghost from my past make me question the best thing in my present, for hurting you, for forgetting, even for a moment, why I fell in love with you in that coffee shop, why I chose you every day since, why I want to choose you for the rest of my life. The sun was high now, its heat intense on my skin. In the distance, dark. Clouds were gathering, just as Marcus had predicted. Soon, the storm would reach us, turning this calm morning into something else entirely. I called Sophie last night, I said. She was ready to fly here and help me leave you. I would have deserved that. Yes, you would have. I stood up, brushing sand from my dress. But I told her to wait. To give me 24 hours to see if the man I married could find his way back from whatever time warp he'd been living. Tom stood too, hope and fear warring in his expression. And I'm still here. Not because I've forgiven you, that's going to take time, but because I believe that sometimes the loves we think we'll never recover from are just preparing us for the fights worth fighting. Rachel's words again, he said softly. No, I corrected him. Mine. Because while you were lost in your memories last night, I was making a choice of my own. To believe that what we have is stronger than nostalgia. To believe that real love isn't about being worth choosing. It's about choosing each other every day, especially on the days when it's hardest. The first drops of rain began to fall, warm and heavy. Tom reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "I'm willing to fight for us," I said over the growing sound of the storm. "But first, you need to decide if you're ready to let go of that weight you've been carrying. Ready to be fully present in our life, not wondering about what-ifs and second chances." Thunder rolled across the water, and the rain began in earnest. We ran for shelter beneath the nearest palm trees, the world around us transforming into sheets of tropical rain. Through the downpour, the coral reef was still visible, its colors more vibrant against the darkening sky. "What happens now?" Tom asked, water running down his face. I looked out at the storm-tossed ocean, thinking about Rachel and James on their midnight boat, about choices and consequences, about the weight of the past and the promise of the future. "Now," I said, "we start over. Not as the people we were 2 weeks ago, but as the people we are today. People who know that love isn't always perfect, that trust once broken has to be earned back, that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones we make every morning when we wake up and decide to try again." The storm raged around us, but in our small shelter beneath the palms, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet. But perhaps the beginning of understanding, of healing, of finding our way back to each other through the rain. Later, we would have to face the practical realities of what had happened here. We would need counseling, conversations, time to rebuild what had been shaken. But for now, we stood together in the storm, watching nature remind us that sometimes the most beautiful moments come after the rain. I felt Tom's hand find mine in the shadows, and this time, I didn't pull away. Because sometimes love means holding on through the storm, even when you're not sure what you'll find on the other side. 3 years have passed since that stormy morning in the Maldives. Life has a way of teaching you lessons when you least expect them, and sometimes those lessons come wrapped in the most painful packages. That's what I've learned since our honeymoon turned into something I never could have imagined. Today, Tom and I stand on a different beach, watching different waves roll in. We're in Australia, and I just finished giving a presentation at an international marine conservation conference. My legal work has taken an unexpected turn into environmental protection, specifically focusing on coral reef preservation. Sometimes, the very thing that almost breaks you becomes your greatest purpose. Rachel and James are here too. They presented their latest research findings yesterday. We had dinner together last night, all 4 of us, and the most surprising thing was how unsurprising it felt. Time and growth have a way of transforming even the deepest wounds into something else entirely. "Your presentation was amazing," Rachel told me over dessert, her wedding ring catching the restaurant's soft lighting. "The way you're fighting for these protected areas. It's exactly what the reefs need." She and James have 2 kids now, twins, born last year. They split their time between research sites, their children already at home in the water as much as on land. Looking at them, you'd never guess the chaos that once swirled around us all. But that's the thing about healing. It leaves marks, but they fade with time. Tom and I chose not to have children yet. Instead, we've spent these years rebuilding something stronger than what we had before. We dive together every chance we get, but now we take pictures of coral restoration sites and document marine life recovery. Our underwater photography has been featured in several environmental journals, our names listed side by side as contributors. When young couples ask us for marriage advice, and surprisingly, many do, we tell them the truth. Love isn't about perfect moments or fairy tale endings. It's about choosing to grow together, even when growth means facing uncomfortable truths about yourself and each other. James pulled me aside after dinner last night, while Tom and Rachel were discussing camera techniques for deep water photography. "Do you ever think about that week?" he asked quietly. I watched our spouses talking, their interaction now purely professional, without a trace of the tension that once crackled between them. "Sometimes," I admitted, but not in the way you might think. I think about how close we all came to losing something real in pursuit of something that only existed in memory. He nodded, understanding. We've developed our own kind of friendship. James and I, one built on shared experience and mutual respect. Rachel and I named our conservation project after that week, he said. We call it the Phoenix Initiative, studying how reef systems recover and thrive after near destruction. This morning, as I watch Tom photographing the sunrise over the Pacific, I think about all the ways love can be tested, broken, and reborn. Like the coral reefs we work to protect, relationships can survive seemingly insurmountable challenges if given the chance to heal. A message appears on my phone. It's Sophie, asking how the conference is going. She never did have to make that emergency flight to the Maldives, but she's remained my steadfast supporter through everything since. Living your best marine warrior princess life, her message reads, followed by ocean emojis. I smile, typing, Beck, something like that. Tom says hi. Tom lowers his camera and joins me on the beach, wrapping an arm around my waist. What are you thinking about? He asks, noticing my contemplative mood. About how endings aren't always what they seem, I reply. Sometimes they're just beginnings in disguise. He kisses my temple, and I lean into him, breathing in the salt, air and morning sunshine. We're not the same people who went on that honeymoon 3 years ago. We're stronger, wiser, more aware of how precious and fragile love can be. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all, that real love isn't about avoiding storms, but about learning to dance in the rain together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.